right now. Come on, time to get ahead. Don't let up.
One of the most overlooked features of a game is arguably its sound and music, overshadowed by more prevalent factors such as gameplay and visual fidelity. And it's a damn shame too, because there's lots of games out there that have amazing sound, but this ultimately plays second fiddle to something like a grass texture or the FOV. Anyway, being the huge FPS junkie that I am, I thought it would be worth taking a look at some of the better soundtracks for FPS games over the last couple decades. Now for this list, instead of just singling out a single track from the entire soundtrack, I'm instead looking at the game's music on the whole. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first game on this list is a little known shooting game named XIII, developed for Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 2 and GameCube. Based on a comic of the same name, in XIII you play the role of amnesiac Jason Fly, uncovering his past involving a massive conspiracy and a secret society hell-bent on world domination. XIII was a comic book come to life with gorgeous cel-shading visuals and a thumping, dynamic jazz-funk soundtrack that adapted to the player's actions. From those moments when you were sneaking through a military base or fighting your nemesis amongst a series of launching rockets, XIII's soundtrack never lost a beat, literally. It's the kind of music that makes you feel like you need 2 fingers of scotch in one hand and a Lucky Strike cigarette in the other. When you see a game called Redneck Rampage, you kind of have to know what you're getting yourself into. Like a lot of shooting games from its time, it plays on cultural stereotypes, in this case whiskey drinking, farting and cussing rednecks taking on an alien invasion to save their prized pig. That is literally the plot. The soundtrack is comprised of licensed songs by artists like Mojo Nixon and the Beat Farmers. It's alright, I haven't heard of them either. It's a great compilation of appropriately themed tunes that really keep the game in line with its theme, and it makes it one of the more memorable shooting games of its time.
Double battered and Dixie fried.
Ken Levine is kind of like the Orson Welles of the gaming industry. I mean, System Shock 2 was really his Citizen Kane. And like Welles, Levine just peaked way too early. BioShock Infinite was arguably the weakest game in the series, but few would doubt that the first game was absolutely fantastic across the board. One of the greatest things about the first game was the way it made Rapture seem like such a believable place, in the sense that it really felt like a world that had gone to shit. Then to contrast the downright nightmarish nature of the city and its inhabitants, you had these slightly offbeat but still perfectly fitting music tracks that would play at the most random of moments. From famous groups like the Ink Spots, Bobby Darin, Bing Crosby and Ella Fitzgerald, I don't think there was a single track that felt out of place, or didn't help to heighten the game's atmosphere. I mean, who doesn't like a bit of Bobby Darin's Beyond the Sea, playing whilst they shoot lightning and bees out of their goddamn palms? Payday 2 could basically be summed up as a theft simulator, in which you choose some wonderful characters and knock off jewelry stores, banks and museums. It was a pretty simple game, you just go around shooting cops and picking up bags of cash, jewels and other valuable crap, but it did have a really kick-ass soundtrack composed by a dude named Simon Viklund. Each heist had its own particular theme, and pretty much all of these are really intense, ramping up during the various waves of assault from the police forces, and then calming down again during those rare moments when you're given a brief respite to catch your breath. It's kind of like half techno, half rock with a bit of orchestral stuff here and there, but it is all catchy and full of great melodies and beats. To this day, I still haven't met a single person who didn't enjoy Blood Dragon, and that's probably a good thing. Blood Dragon was a pastiche of everything awesomely terrible about the 1980s.
Mark 4 style, motherfucker!
With main character voiced by Michael Biehn and a pseudo 80s soundtrack composed by an Aussie guy named Power Glove, this soundtrack hit all the right notes. Yep, don't worry, I've got plenty more of these puns. With tunes that sounded like they'd been taken out of a film like Terminator, it really was one of the game's biggest strengths, and just helped to add to its tongue-in-cheek tone.
Oh, shit!
Someone even had the bright idea to reuse the climactic track from the Rocky IV soundtrack in the game's ending. This is the song that originally played during the film's finale when Rocky and Ivan Drago were beating the crap out of each other. In Blood Dragon, it's used at the end of the game's campaign when you're riding on top of one of the eponymous blood dragons, shooting lasers from your fucking eyes. The Medal of Honor series has been up and down more times than I care to count, but one thing that has remained strong throughout the series has been its incredible music, with the third game in the series, Allied Assault, really taking the crown. Medal of Honor Allied Assault wasn't the first World War II game to hit the PC, but it was the first game to have a lasting impression on many gamers, myself included. Part of this was due to some of its set pieces, but also to a brilliant soundtrack composed by Michael Giacchino. From the iconic main theme through to the subtly threatening tune that played throughout the Sniper Town mission. The music really took the game from being a simple World War II shooter and made it much more cinematic and ultimately more memorable. I dare anyone to listen to that main theme and try to not get at least a bit misty-eyed.
Watch for minefield!
Another World War II themed game to make this list is Return to Castle Wolfenstein, the long-awaited follow-up to the influential Wolfenstein 3D, and one of the greatest of the old-school shooters. In Return to Castle Wolfenstein, you play the part of BJ Blazkowicz, taking on Nazi soldiers, mutants, and zombies as you try to stop an evil warlord from being resurrected. In one of the most polished and hardcore single-player campaigns of practically all time. Now, this amazing soundtrack was composed by Bill Brown, and much like Medal of Honor Allied Assault, it's very orchestral, making everything feel much more epic and grandiose. From the triumphant fanfare that would play when you finished a level, through to the ominous militaristic theme when you first encountered the elite paratrooper unit. Nowadays, so many video game soundtracks, especially shooters in particular, are all full of electronic and Hans Zimmer style riffs and tunes that pretty much make your eardrums bleed. And Return to Castle Wolfenstein is a great example of how unique and diverse soundtracks in gaming used to be. No video game soundtrack list would be complete without mentioning the Half-Life series in one form or another. In the original game, the soundtrack was compiled with these sort of random tunes that would just play throughout the campaign, most often during set pieces. But it really found its form in the second game, Half-Life 2, and its ensuing episodic content. God, that was a mouthful. Composed by Kelly Bailey, it's a collection of 2 or 3 minute tracks that once again generally play during the game's set pieces and scripted events, like making your way over a perilous railway bridge or cruising down the canals in an airboat. I don't even know what sort of genre you put this music into. I mean, I guess you'd call it experimental or techno. I honestly don't even know. Part of what makes it so unique is that there really is nothing else quite like it in gaming, but also in general. You could even go so far as to say that every track even sounds like it's composed by a completely different artist. Half-Life 2 may show its age in a few ways, but this soundtrack definitely hasn't. I could spend an entire video talking about all the kick-ass music in the Unreal games due to the efforts of 4 guys: Alexander Brandon, Dan Gardepie, Mikhail Vanden Boss, and Reeves Gabrels. I'm sure I totally mispronounced every single one of those. Anyway, these guys are kind of like the Tangerine Dream of video game composers, and their real opus was their work on Deus Ex.
My vision is augmented.
Considered by many to be one of the greatest games of all times for things like its writing, level design, etc., it also had one of the best soundtracks of any game I've ever played.
You came all the way to Paris to tell me that?
Every single tune worked really well in capturing the culture it was representing, and there are countless tracks that are still stuck in my head to this day, with the Hong Kong Streets theme being the most relentless. I mean, I still can't listen to that song without hearing Maggie Chow's terrible accent in the back of my head.
Mr. J.C. Denton, in the fresh.
Or those brain-dead Aussie tourists waiting outside the Lucky Money nightclub.
He's kind of cute.
Is this a good club?
But my favourite soundtrack of all time has to be Outlaws.
No!
Outlaws is one of those games that most people have never even heard of, let alone played. It was developed by LucasArts during that golden age of PC gaming in the mid to late 90s and is still one of the best games to ever grace the genre and even the platform. In Outlaws, you're a retired marshal named James Anderson who comes home one day to find his daughter kidnapped and his wife murdered. From there, you move through a dozen or so different levels, each with their own unique musical themes, killing all manner of assholes in your way in a quest for vengeance. Now, Outlaws did to spaghetti westerns what Blood Dragon would eventually do for 80s films, if that makes sense. With an incredible soundtrack composed by Clint Budjakian, again, I'm sure I mispronounced that, it's a blatant homage to other films like The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Don't believe me? Well, listen to this track from Outlaws. But even those tracks that are somewhat more original are still expertly composed with some brilliantly crafted melodies and tunes, showing off the creativity prevalent from composers like Ennio Morricone. The production values aren't far off something you'd hear in a big budget film, and to have them grace your ears in something like a simple first-person shooter really puts Outlaws in a league of its own. And that's why it gets my vote for the best FPS soundtrack of all time. And that's it for my list. I hope I didn't offend anyone with this list by leaving something out. You know, the good thing about these videos at the end of the day is that they're not gospel, they're just someone else's opinion. So feel free to leave a comment and let me know what your favorite game soundtrack of all time was. If you'd like to see more of these videos, drop a few suggestions for what other FPS gaming lists you'd like to see next.